Gene Hackman died in February 2025. His wife, Betsy Arakawa, died weeks before him. Both deaths were ruled natural causes. That part is confirmed. But what investigators found on that property after they arrived, that is where things get complicated. And I want to walk through all of it carefully, because there is a lot of noise around this case. And I think it matters to separate what we actually know from what is being claimed. Let me start with the basics. Hackman's estate was in Santa Fe, New Mexico. 23 acres, dense forest on all sides, stone perimeter walls, reinforced gates, thermal cameras, motion sensors layered across the entire property, the kind of security setup that goes well beyond what most people, even very wealthy people, put around their homes. According to security consultants who reviewed the property in the past, the infrastructure on that estate was comparable to what you would expect around a government facility, not a retired actor's home in the desert. That detail alone made investigators pay closer attention when they arrived. Now here is where the confirmed part ends and the reported part begins. According to sources connected to the investigation, when federal agents were processing the scene inside the mansion, they discovered a concealed passage in the private library, behind mahogany wall paneling, that looked identical to every other wall in the room. A hollow section, cold air rising from below, stone steps descending into darkness. The way I understand it, the passage was not visible unless you were specifically checking the walls with your hands. It was hidden that well. The tunnel itself is reported to descend 312 feet below the library floor. That is roughly the height of a 30-story building, going straight down into the earth. The descent reportedly took investigators about 15 minutes on foot. Stone steps the entire way, temperature dropping as they went deeper. All sound from the house above disappearing at roughly the halfway point. And when they reached the bottom, they entered a chamber. That chamber is reported to measure approximately 40 by 60 feet. The ceiling arched in a style that historians have described as consistent with Spanish colonial construction from the late 1800s, which means, and this is important, the tunnel and the chamber underneath this property appear to predate Hackman's ownership by at least a century. He did not build this. Someone else did, long before he ever purchased the land. I think that is the details people keep glossing over. Hackman bought the property. He built walls around it. He hired vetted staff under ironclad agreements. He installed modern surveillance infrastructure. But whatever is underneath that ground was already there. The question of who built it and why has not been answered publicly. Inside the chamber, investigators reportedly found 47 wooden crates, some intact, some crumbled with age. Contents spilled across the stone floor. The dust in the room was described as the kind that takes decades to accumulate, lying in even, undisturbed layers across flat surfaces. But there was a problem. In certain spots near the crates and along the floor, the dust had been disturbed, not randomly. The disturbances traced a deliberate path, from the base of the staircase to specific crates and then toward the far wall. Someone had been in that chamber more than once, and it was not the investigators. They were the first authorized people to enter. So whoever walked that path did so without permission and without being detected. Now let me explain what was reportedly inside those crates. One crate contained a leather-bound ledger dated 1947, written entirely in German, in a precise, trained handwriting, full of names, dates, and financial figures. That ledger has not been publicly acknowledged by any agency. Another crate held 63 photographs, old, yellowed, fragile, showing men in military uniforms that reportedly do not match any recognized armed force from any known nation. Some photos showed meetings. Others showed locations that researchers have not been able to place on any map. Several showed individuals whose names had been deliberately removed from any accompanying documents. The detail that reportedly stopped everyone in the room was one specific photograph. It showed a group of men standing in front of what appeared to be the entrance to that exact tunnel. Same stonework, same arch. Based on clothing and image quality, the photo was taken in the 1940s. The group was formally assembled, the way people pose when an occasion is being officially marked. Two faces in that photograph had been carefully cut out, not torn, cut, with a sharp instrument, clean edges, precise removal. Someone made a deliberate decision that those two faces were not allowed to be identified, ever. To me, that detail is one of the most significant in this entire case. Because cutting a face out of a photograph is not something you do casually. It takes intention, it takes a reason, and it means someone believed at some point in history that those identities were dangerous enough to permanently remove. But the photographs were not the most unsettling thing reported from inside that chamber. The walls were covered in carvings, hundreds of them, from the floor to the top of the arched ceiling, covering every available surface, not scratched or random, carved with precision and care, the kind of work that takes significant time and knowledge. Investigators photographed more than 300 individual symbols during the initial documentation. Here is the part that I find genuinely difficult to explain cleanly. None of those symbols, not a single one, has been matched to any known language or writing system on Earth. Not ancient languages, not modern ones, not any of the thousands of documented writing systems that linguists and archaeologists have cataloged across all of human history. Specialists from 3 universities were reportedly brought in, cryptographers with government clearances, archaeologists specializing in colonial southwestern history. Nobody reached a consensus. Nobody could confidently identify what they were looking at. Some markings resembled medieval European alchemical symbols, but with alterations that suggest either deliberate modification or a completely separate tradition that developed independently. Others looked like technical diagrams, geometric and precise, the kind of visual language that represents function rather than words. Engineers who reviewed photographs described them as looking planned, engineered, like actual instructions for something real. And then, there were markings that appeared to correspond to astronomical charts. Based on the mathematical positioning of certain symbols, one analysis suggested the charts could correspond to stellar positions from approximately 12,000 years in the past. Or, and this is where I have to be clear, this is deep speculation, 12,000 years in the future. The precision in the geometry reportedly ruled out guesswork. Whoever carved these understood orbital mechanics at a level that raises serious questions about when and by whom this work was done. Now, I want to be honest about something here. 3 explanations have been put forward for the symbols. The first is that a wealthy, eccentric previous owner, an amateur with an interest in occult systems, created them as a private obsession. The second is that they are a coded communication system requiring a specific key to decode. The third, and this is the one nobody is comfortable saying plainly, is that these symbols represent knowledge that was deliberately hidden, passed through generations of people specifically chosen to protect it, information that was never meant to be found. I am not going to tell you which of those is true. Nobody knows. What I can tell you is that none of the specialists brought in could debunk any of those 3 explanations either. Now here is where the layers get even deeper. At the far end of the chamber, partially hidden behind crates that appeared to have been placed there deliberately rather than stored, investigators found a door, 8 feet tall, 4 inches thick, iron, covered in rust, and the kind of grime that builds up over decades of undisturbed air. No handle, a lock mechanism that none of the agents present had ever seen before. Not a standard padlock, not a combination system. Something designed specifically for this door by someone who clearly understood that whatever was being sealed away was meant to stay that way permanently. That door is reportedly still sealed today. The FBI has not opened it. No official explanation has been given for why. All statements from federal authorities have been worded with a very specific kind of careful precision. They confirm very little and explain nothing. The way I read those statements, they are crafted by people who are very aware of exactly what they are not saying. But here is the detail that makes the sealed door genuinely important, beyond just the mystery of what might be behind it. Thermal imaging equipment detected airflow on the other side, not the slow, stale movement of air trapped in a sealed space for decades. Active circulation, the kind consistent with connected spaces of significant volume. Whatever is behind that iron door is not a dead end. It connects to something else, something larger underground. And geological surveys conducted on that property, surveys done years before Hackman ever purchased it, actually recorded this. They noted underground voids in the subsurface terrain, hollow pockets extending hundreds of feet in multiple directions, voids that do not match any natural geological formation typical of that region. The surveys recorded the anomalies. Nobody followed up. Nobody asked what those voids were. Now, federal investigators are standing 312 feet underground in front of a sealed iron door with airflow coming from the other side, and those same voids are still uncharted. The tunnel may not be a single passage. It may be the entry point to a network. Now let me address the deaths directly, because I think this is where people are most confused about what is confirmed and what is not. Betsy Arakawa died around February 3rd, 2025. Her cause of death has been confirmed as natural causes. Gene Hackman died sometime after her. His cause of death was confirmed as cardiovascular disease, complicated by Alzheimer's. Those are confirmed facts. What is not confirmed, and what investigators found strange, is that Betsy's body was not discovered for over 3 weeks. During those 3 weeks, on an estate with an extensive surveillance system, including thermal cameras and motion sensors across every inch of the property, the internal camera recordings were corrupted. The corruption was reportedly described by forensic technicians as consistent with deliberate erasure rather than system failure. That is a specific and significant distinction. A system failure and a deliberate erasure look different to people who analyze this kind of data professionally. The technicians reportedly said it looked deliberate. External cameras, the only footage that survived, showed lights activating and deactivating in different rooms across the weeks between Betsy's death and the discovery of both bodies. Someone or something was moving through that house during those 3 weeks, on a property with a surveillance grid described as comparable to a government installation, and none of it was recorded in any usable form. Hackman's personal documents were also reportedly found in a specific state. On the surface, the filing system looked intact and organized, but investigators trained to look carefully noticed the internal order was wrong. Documents had been rifled through and hastily reorganized, not perfectly, close enough to pass a casual look, not close enough to pass a trained one. Either Hackman himself, in his final days, was moving and hiding specific documents, or someone else had already been through them before investigators arrived. There is also the matter of what contractors remember. Workers who were hired for specific construction projects on the estate years earlier recall being asked unusual questions. Questions about blast-resistant doors, industrial-grade containment, the kind of doors used in government bunkers, not just to keep people out, but to contain whatever is on the other side. Workers who asked too many questions were replaced. Workers who completed the job signed agreements preventing them from discussing it for decades. Several of those agreements have now expired, which is why some of this is only now being spoken about. Property history adds another layer. Records show the land changed hands 7 times between 1920 and 1965. Each transaction was reportedly structured specifically to obscure the buyer's identity. Shell companies, anonymous trusts, vague documentation. 3 separate property surveys were commissioned between 1945 and 1950, all 3 submitting incomplete reports. 2 of the surveyors left New Mexico shortly after beginning their work. The 3rd died in a car accident 6 weeks after his final visit to the property. The accident was ruled unremarkable at the time. Nobody connected the timing to the survey work. Now there is also the question of what happens next with the property itself. Reports indicate that someone has already filed paperwork to purchase the estate. Before the investigation was closed, filed by a buyer whose identity is reportedly structured to be impossible to determine through normal channels, an anonymous trust registered in the Cayman Islands. No public filings, no names. Enough capital to acquire the property immediately, and they filed this before investigators finished processing the scene. That detail tells me whatever is on this property Someone outside of law enforcement very much wants access to it, and they are not waiting. Every FOIA request filed regarding this investigation has reportedly been denied, all of them on grounds of an ongoing investigation. But here is the question that I keep coming back to. 2 elderly deaths, ruled natural causes. Why does that warrant federal classification of the property? Why does that result in denial of every single public records request? Why does it involve federal units that do not appear in any public directory? Those are real questions, and nobody is answering them. To me, what this case comes down to is several things that I can clearly separate. What is confirmed: Gene Hackman and Betsy Arakawa died in February 2025. Both deaths were ruled natural causes. The property had extensive security infrastructure. Betsy's body was undiscovered for over 3 weeks. What is reported but not officially confirmed: the tunnel, the chamber, the crates, the ledger in German, the photographs with cut-out faces, the symbols on the walls, the iron door, the airflow behind it, the corrupted camera footage. What is genuinely unknown: who built the tunnel? What is behind the iron door? What the symbols mean? Whether the tunnel connects to a larger underground network, whether Hackman was protecting something beneath that property or simply unaware of what was there. And what remains the biggest unanswered question of all: what is the FBI actually investigating if this is just 2 natural deaths? Because the scope of what has been reported, the classification level, the federal involvement, the property restriction, the FOIA denials, that does not match a natural cause death investigation. Not even slightly. The iron door is reportedly still sealed. The airflow behind it is reportedly still moving. The 47 crates are in federal custody at an undisclosed location. The German ledger has not been publicly acknowledged. The symbols have not been explained. The anonymous buyer is reportedly still waiting for access. What I understand right now is this: there is something underneath that property that predates Gene Hackman by at least a century. He built serious infrastructure around it. He kept serious people away from it. And whatever is behind that sealed iron door, the FBI either cannot open it, will not open it, or has opened it and is not saying what they found. Any one of those 3 possibilities is deeply significant. And until that changes, this investigation remains one of the most genuinely unexplained situations in recent American history. So for me, the main thing is this: the deaths may have been natural, but what was underneath that property is clearly not. And the level of federal silence around something officially classified as a routine case tells you more than any official statement ever will.